Today I'm going to talk to you about how I prepared my submission packages, which include my query, synopsis, and manuscript for submission for literary agents. In the last video of this series, I talked about how I researched and organized my agent data into a spreadsheet. I'm going to start off with some tips on how to prepare your submission package before diving into that spreadsheet again and how I further break down this process of submitting to agents. I'm going to start with a query letter. So a query letter is a one-page cover letter that basically outlines what your book is all about in the hopes of getting their attention enough to read your sample pages. Now I will do a deep dive into my personal query letter in a different video, but right now I don't really feel comfortable sharing that as the book has not been sold yet, but I will give an example using a few lines from my query to help give a little bit of a template for you to set up your own query letter. So the standard for writing a query letter is you say, "Dear agent name," and personally I just put their first and last name. I don't add Mr., Mrs. Just in the age that we're in now, it's easier just to put their name versus any pronouns that they may or may not use. And I'm a little bit of a stickler for making sure that the name is spelled correctly, so what I usually do is I copy and paste from the website just to be sure as an added precaution. So the next part after that is basically your purpose for querying them, and usually that's because you want to give them your book. So you want to give pertinent information up front with the title, the genre, and also the word count. So agents are able to quickly see that if this is a book that they're interested in, and the word count does have meaning in that sense. So if you have a adult novel that's only 30,000 words, that's not really an adult novel, that's more of a novella. So they want to see up front if you are even a right fit for them. And if you have a personal connection to this agent, say you met them at a conference and they asked you to submit to them, I always put this personal connection up front in that first paragraph because it reminds them who you are and that they asked you to query. I just recommend keeping it as brief as possible. So this next section is really the most important one, and it's all about your book. Usually this is about 2 paragraphs long in which you talk about the setting of the book, the setup or the premise, the main character, and the main conflict of the book, or why this agent would want to read this book. When I look at this section of my query letter, I think of it as a back cover of a book. If you look at a back cover of any book, usually it has this setup and it's supposed to pull you in and make you want to open that book, and in this case you want the agent to open up your sample pages and read more. Usually this is written in present tense, and also you want to convey the tone of your novel. So say you wrote a romantic comedy, you don't want the query letter to read like a eulogy, so be sure to bring that awesome voice that you have created in your book into the query letter as well. So the next section is one of those sections that is divisive in a sense, where some agents require it, some agents don't, some agents don't really care to look at it at all, and that's the comparative titles section. So this is basically an opportunity for you to help the agent envision your book on a bookshelf. So I wrote an adult thriller, so I thought of other adult thriller authors and books that really were comparison titles to mine. Obviously not the exact book because I didn't plagiarize a book, but you want to see where you would fit in the bookshelf. And if you do include comparative titles, be sure to put around 2 to 3 comparative titles, no more than that or it gets a little clunky. And the query letter itself also has a word count, so you want to be sure to leave a lot of the words and the real estate of your query to be more about your book specifically. And then you can give a brief bio about yourself. In my query letter, since I have been previously published, I include my publishing credentials, but if this is your first novel, it's okay to say, "This is my first novel." This is really not the place for you to put your love of your pets or your family. As much as you want to connect with the agent, this is really just a place to focus on your publishing. If you have any degrees or if you won any contests, this is really important to put in there, but I would leave a lot of the personal details out of it. And as I mentioned, a word count, usually the sweet spot with query letters is 250 to 300 words total for the entire page. So as I said, you don't want to be talking about your pets or your family in the bio when you really want to intrigue the agent with your book. And writing a query letter doesn't happen overnight. It's definitely an art, but it also deserves the amount of care that you have taken with your manuscript. Don't just slap something together and send it to agents. This is sometimes the only thing that you will be submitting to an agent upfront. Some of them don't require pages from your manuscript, so you want to make sure it's as best as it can be. And the next part of a submission package that I recommend having upfront is the synopsis. My go-to reference for synopsis writing, which I have been using for years and I still plan to use it going forward, is an article on Publishing Crawl written by Susan is in Dennard, and it is an absolute perfect reference for synopsis writing, so I'm not going to go into any more detail about synopsis writing. I recommend you check this out. I will link it in the description box below. Bookmark it for later use, and it will definitely help you write a synopsis. So my only main tips, in addition to what she says, is make sure that in a synopsis you write the full ending of the book. You want from start to finish the main plot of the book, and I guess if you have any room you can put some subplots in there, but usually it's just the main focus of the book, the main plot. And also, it's an unwritten rule to only name 3 of the characters in your book in the synopsis. Other than that, you may just mention the troubled mother or the sick boy versus naming the characters up front, because there's too many names, too many ways for an agent to get mixed up with names. So that is just a little bit of a unwritten rule about that. And also there's an unwritten rule about how you introduce these characters. So in my synopsis and other places that I've read about, putting the character's name when you first mention them in all capital letters to really jump out at you, and then throughout the rest of the synopsis you would put them in normal capitalization, but that is not necessary, and I guess it just depends on your style and preference. And just like you would have critique partners or beta readers for your books, make sure you have other people take a look at your query letter and synopsis and ask them questions about it. Are there any points that they are confused or things that don't make sense within the language of those items? And this is also a little bit of an easier ask than it would be for someone to read a complete manuscript, so it's definitely part of the process, and you should absolutely get more people to look at these very important parts of your submission package. Now that your submission package is ready to go, I'm going to jump back into that spreadsheet that I had from my last video, and we're going to further break down how I queried agents. Now I started another worksheet within that workbook and broke down that larger list of agents that I had into a clean querying spreadsheet, and this was broken down by response time. So this was an inspiration from one of Alexa Dunn's videos about querying agents, and in that video she discusses starting off with fast responders to get a better idea of how your submission package is working. I really connected with this method in terms of how I would start querying. So I separated the sections into fast, which was usually under 5 days of a response time, and then moderate, which was 1 to 2 weeks, and then I did have a slow section which was months, but I did break it down a middle ground in there, which was 3 to 4 weeks. So how did I find these response rates? So I found them mostly from the agent's website and also using Query Tracker. I mentioned Query Tracker in my last video in this series, and it has been an essential tool for me going forward with querying. So usually on their website they may say that they respond in 2 weeks or a couple months, or usually they list it by weeks, and I would go from there. Then I would check Query Tracker under their name and see how quickly they were responding to other authors. Now, as I mentioned in that previous video, Query Tracker is really based on authors' responses and when they hear back from agents. So like I said, this is a tool and not a rule when it comes to these response times, but I did find it helped me a lot. So I took a list of about 10 agents and I separated them into these different sections. For my first round of queries, I submitted to these fast responders. And between them, it was a mix of email submissions and query manager submissions. As I started with each agent, this was a bit of a slow process for me because it was the first time that I was doing it, and I wanted to be sure I was preparing everything they wanted up front so that when I was ready to submit to them, I could just copy and paste and be done with it. So first off, I would check their Twitter and also their agent website to make sure they were still open for queries. Sometimes agents are closed for queries depending on if it's the holidays or if they want time to catch up or if they're on vacation, anything like that. So I wanted to make sure they were open, because sometimes if they are not open, then they will automatically delete any queries that come in, and you don't really want to end up in someone's trash box instead of their inbox. Then I also reviewed their submission guidelines again, even though I do have it on the spreadsheet. I wanted to be doubly sure that I gave them everything that they were requesting. And for example, there was an agency that I looked at that they had a very specific template for how they wanted their query letters to be sent to them. So I was able to take my query letter and tweak it to exactly what they were looking for before sending. Then I created a new folder on my computer and I made it specific for each agent that I was querying. So I put their name in there and all of the things that I needed to submit to them, so I knew exactly what I had submitted to them and then it was exactly what they wanted, and I wasn't mixed up with a jumble of open documents or anything like that and accidentally sending the wrong query to the wrong agent. So then I personalized my query letter. I put their name in there and any personal connection that we had in that first paragraph. And also I would tweak it a little bit based on what they were looking for. If they were very specific on we're looking for domestic thrillers with female protagonists, I would add that to the query letter if it was applicable for my book. And most agents, when they do request sample pages, are usually under 25 pages. A lot of the ones that I saw were 5 to 10 pages. So what I did is I also broke down my manuscript into the requested amount of pages and also put that in the folder for the agent that I was looking at, so that when I did copy and paste, it was a quicker process instead of grabbing 5 pages every time, or 10 pages or 25 pages, because most of them you did have to cut and paste when it came to email or query manager. And this was just a way to streamline the process. So then, taking all of that information that I had, I submitted to them via email or query manager. And a caveat about query manager, some agents will have more than just the requested submission package of sample pages, query, or synopsis. Sometimes they will have questions asking who is the best reader for your book and what are your comparable titles. So what I did with these questions is, as I answered them, I put them in a separate document so that if another agent asked a similar question, I was able to copy and paste it and not have to reinvent the wheel every time I submitted on Query Manager. So that's just a little bonus tip that I hope will help you. It certainly helped me streamline the process. And as they were quick responders, I did end up hearing back from them relatively quickly, and that was great. But what was not great about it was that they were mostly rejections. So based on that information, it wasn't really enough for me to say, oh wait, my book isn't working, because it's all subjective and maybe the agent wasn't interested in the premise, or maybe my query letter wasn't working. But I wanted to gather more data before I made any sort of changes to what I was doing. And I forgot where exactly I heard this advice, but it really resonated with me in terms of any responses that I received. So I usually tried to have 4 or 5 queries out at once, and once I received a response, whether it was a rejection or a request, I would automatically send out another query, sort of having feelers out there for agents and hearing back from them, maybe quicker than doing batches at a time every week or so. So that was just another tip that I had found throughout my time in research, and it definitely helped sort of get more information back than waiting in between querying batches, if that makes sense. So there weren't a ton of fast responders on my list, and so I started to move on to those moderate responders, which was between 1 and 2 weeks, just to sort of spread out my list a little more. And while I didn't initially submit to that A list of agents, those dream agents, right away, I did start to sprinkle in my B list as well, just to see if my submission package was working. So the more I started to query agents, the quicker the process was. It wasn't quite what I expected when I started this process. I thought I would send off batches of queries, but as the responses came in, as I said, I would query based on that. So that was just a little unexpected for me. But that's the thing about querying. You do as much as you can up front with your submission package and your manuscript, and it's out of your hands entirely. In terms of data, once I started to receive rejections and requests, I had the idea that my submission package was pretty solid. I didn't have a percentage on how many they worked for, but it at least meant that something was working, and a lot of the rejections seemed to be subjective. So that part of the process I'm going to leave for my next video, when I am doing a special collaboration about agent rejections and what they mean for your book. So if you have any questions about the querying process, let's continue this conversation in the comments below. I'd love to chat with you about it. And once again, if you enjoyed this video, do give it a like, hit that subscribe button and the little notification bell next to it so you know the next time I upload, and I'll see you soon.